The moment Sarah placed 5 crisp $100 bills on the table, she knew her life was about to change forever. What she didn't know was that this single act of generosity would unravel a story so profound, so devastatingly beautiful that it would challenge everything she thought she understood about dignity, pride, and the invisible walls we build around our hearts. The man sitting across from her, Marcus, with his warm brown eyes and carefully pressed second-hand shirt, stared at the money as if it were a grenade that had just been pulled from its pin, and in that suspended moment of silence, the entire restaurant seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them and the weight of what this gesture truly meant. Sarah had matched with Marcus 3 weeks earlier on a dating app. His profile was refreshingly honest. No shirtless gym photos, no pictures on expensive vacations. Just a genuine smile, a photo with a golden retriever that wasn't even his, and a bio that read, middle school teacher, aspiring novelist, firm believer that the best conversations happen over coffee that's just slightly too hot to drink comfortably. She had laughed out loud at that, and something about his authenticity in a sea of carefully curated personas made her swipe right without hesitation. Their text conversations had been effortless, filled with terrible puns, deep questions about childhood, dreams, and a shared love for obscure indie films that nobody else seemed to appreciate. When they finally met at the small Italian restaurant, he'd suggested a modest place far from the trendy downtown spots she usually frequented. Sarah felt an immediate connection that went beyond physical attraction. Marcus was thoughtful, funny, and possessed the rare quality of actually listening when she spoke, not just waiting for his turn to talk. He asked about her work as a corporate lawyer with genuine curiosity, not the usual intimidation or resentment she encountered. He shared stories about his students with such passion that she could feel his love for teaching radiating across the table. He spoke about the novel he was writing in the early morning hours before school, about characters who felt like old friends, about a dream he was determined to pursue no matter how long it took. If you believe in the power of kindness, in second chances, and in the moments that change everything, please hit that like button, leave a comment below about a time someone's generosity touched your life, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the goodness that still exists in this world. The evening had been perfect. The food was simple but delicious, the wine cheap but warming, and the conversation flowed like they'd known each other for years instead of hours. But Sarah noticed things, small things that others might have missed. The way Marcus carefully reviewed the menu, his eyes lingering on the prices before making his choice. The way he ordered water instead of the wine she suggested, claiming he had early morning grading to do. The way his hand trembled almost imperceptibly when the check arrived, and how quickly he tried to hide his relief when she insisted they split it. She had learned, through careful questions disguised as casual conversation, that Marcus was supporting his younger sister through college after their parents had passed away in a car accident 5 years ago, that his teaching salary barely covered their modest apartment, her tuition, and the mounting stack of medical bills from his mother's final months, that he wrote his novel on a laptop he'd owned for 7 years, its screen held together with electrical tape because replacing it would mean his sister going without textbooks for a semester, that he hadn't bought new clothes for himself in over 2 years, carefully maintaining the few professional outfits he owned with the dedication of someone for whom every thread mattered. When their waiter, a young man with tired eyes and a name tag that read James, brought the check, Sarah watched Marcus pull out his wallet with that same careful deliberation she'd noticed all evening. But before he could reach for his card, she saw something that made her heart crack open. Inside his worn leather wallet, carefully organized, were 3 $20 bills, a 5 and some ones. She realized with sudden, crushing clarity that this dinner, this beautiful, perfect evening represented a significant portion of his weekly budget, that he had chosen to take her somewhere nice instead of suggesting coffee because he wanted to make a good impression, that every bite he'd taken, every smile he'd given her, had been seasoned with the anxiety of money he couldn't afford to spend, but was spending anyway, because she was worth it to him. The check came to $78. Sarah made a show of reaching for her purse, insisting they split it as agreed. Marcus protested with genuine sincerity, saying he'd invited her and wanted to treat her. They negotiated with playful determination until finally settling on splitting it evenly. Marcus placed his card down with visible relief that he could manage half instead of the whole amount. But when James returned with the receipts and left quietly, Sarah did something. That came from a place deeper than calculation or pity. It came from a profound recognition of human dignity and the courage it takes to show up for life even when life has dealt you an impossibly difficult hand. She pulled out $500 in cash that she'd withdrawn earlier for an entirely different purpose, a designer handbag she'd been eyeing, and placed it on the table. Not as part of their payment, but as a tip that was more than 6 times the cost of their meal. She wrote on the receipt, "For James, who serves with grace. You never know what battle someone is fighting. Keep going." Marcus stared at the money, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like pain. His jaw tightened, and when he finally looked up at her, his eyes were glistening with tears he was fighting desperately to control. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "what are you doing?" She had expected gratitude, maybe even joy at her generosity toward their waiter. What she hadn't expected was for Marcus to gently push the money back toward her with shaking hands. "I can't let you do this," he said, each word seeming to cost him something vital. "I know you mean well, but if you're doing this because you think I need charity, because you noticed my old clothes or my cheap wallet or the way I hesitated over the menu prices, I can't accept that. I won't." The words hit her like cold water. In her desire to be generous, to help in a way that felt meaningful, she had inadvertently wounded the pride of a man who was working himself to exhaustion to maintain his dignity and take care of the person he loved most. She had made him feel small when he had spent the entire evening showing her how vast his spirit truly was. "Marcus," she said softly, reaching across the table but not quite touching his hand, respecting the space his pain required, "this isn't about you. I mean, it is, but not in the way you think." She took a breath, choosing her words with the care of someone diffusing something explosive. "All evening, I've watched you be kind to James. You thanked him every time he came to the table. You asked him about his night. You treated him like a human being, not an invisible servant. And I noticed because most people I date don't do that. They're too wrapped up in themselves, in impressing me, in performing. But you saw him, and in a world where people like James work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive, where they're invisible to most customers, where they serve people who have more money in their checking account than James will see in a year, I wanted to do something that mattered." She continued, her own eyes now wet with emotion. "When I was 19, I was James. I worked at a diner to put myself through community college before I could afford to transfer to a university. And one night, after a customer screamed at me for bringing him regular coffee instead of decaf, something the kitchen had messed up, I went to the bathroom and cried. I was exhausted, broke, and starting to believe I'd never escape. Then another customer, an elderly woman who'd witnessed everything, left me a $300 tip with a note that said, 'Education is the door. This is a key. Walk through.' That tip covered my textbooks for the semester. It changed my trajectory. It reminded me that I mattered." Marcus was silent, his hand now resting near hers on the table, their fingers almost touching. "I'm not doing this because I pity you," Sarah continued, her voice fierce with conviction. "I'm doing this because you reminded me of what it means to see people, and because maybe James is working 3 jobs to support his sick mother, or to pay off student loans, or to save enough to follow his own dream. And maybe this tip, which honestly is money I was going to spend on something I don't need and wouldn't even remember buying in a month, maybe this changes something for him, the way the woman's tip changed something for me." She paused, then added with a gentle smile, "And if you're uncomfortable with grand gestures on a first date, consider it a test. I needed to know if you were the kind of man who could accept that women can be generous too, that we don't need protecting from our own choices, and that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone else carry something for a moment." Marcus sat back, processing her words, and slowly, so slowly, a smile began to break through the tears on his face. "That," he said with a shake of his head, "is possibly the most incredible thing anyone has ever said to me. And I'm a novelist. Words are supposed to be my thing." He looked at the money, then at her, then back at the money. I'm sorry I made assumptions. I'm just so used to fighting for every scrap of dignity, of independence, that I forgot generosity isn't always about the recipient's weakness. Sometimes it's about the giver's strength. When James returned to clear their table, Marcus gestured to the money and the note. "This is for you," he said simply. James looked confused until he saw the bills, and then his face went through the same journey Marcus's. S had disbelief, overwhelming emotion, and finally, a gratitude so profound it was almost reverent. I can't," Jim stammered, and Sarah simply said, "Yes, you can. You work hard. You deserve to be seen. Whatever you need this for, use it without guilt." If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that we all have the power to change someone's life with a single act of kindness, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or your own stories of unexpected generosity. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who need to be reminded of humanity's capacity for good. As Marcus walked Sarah to her car that night, their hands finally intertwined. He told her about a student of his named Destiny who came to school hungry most days, about how he'd been quietly buying extra snacks and keeping them in his desk, pretending he'd accidentally ordered too many from the vending machine, about how he wanted to do more but felt helpless against the enormous weight of poverty and need that surrounded him every day. Maybe, Sarah said thoughtfully, we start small. One kid, one tip, one moment of seeing someone, and maybe those moments add up to something bigger than we can imagine. Comment below. I see you if you commit to performing one act of unexpected kindness for someone this week, whether it's a generous tip, a helping hand, or simply taking a moment to truly see someone who's usually invisible. 3 years later, Sarah and Marcus sat in that same Italian restaurant on their anniversary. James, who'd used that tip to finally pay off the debt that had been crushing him and return to school, was now a restaurant manager at a nicer establishment downtown, but came back to visit regularly. The elderly couple in the corner had just received their check with a $200 tip from an anonymous donor, a tradition Sarah and Marcus had started, leaving generous tips at random for people who looked like they needed it most. And Marcus's novel, dedicated to the woman who taught me that accepting grace is just as brave as showing it, had just been accepted for publication by a major publishing house. As they held hands across the same table where everything had changed, Marcus leaned forward and whispered, "I'm glad you tipped $500 that night. Not because of the money, but because your reaction to my reaction told me everything I needed to know about who you really are." Sarah smiled, tears gathering in her eyes as they always did when she remembered that night. "And your reaction," she whispered back, "told me I'd found someone who understood that dignity and generosity aren't opposites. They're dance partners in the beautiful, complicated choreography of being human." The tip that night hadn't just changed James's life, or proven something about Sarah's character, or tested Marcus's pride. It had been the beginning of understanding that we are all carrying invisible burdens, fighting invisible battles, and hoping desperately to be seen, not for what we lack, but for what we are. Human beings doing our best with what we have, deserving of grace, capable of greatness, and connected by the simple truth that we all need each other more than we're usually brave enough to admit.